USS Iowa, nicknamed the Battleship of Presidents, was the lead ship of her class and was the pinnacle of U.S. battleship design under the limitations of the interwar treaty system. She was sleek, fast, and packed a powerful punch with her main battery, which fired a total of 11,834 16-inch rounds over the course of her career. Her nickname arose from the multiple U.S. presidents that have been aboard her, and she served her country proudly during her 19-year career. Iowa earned a total of 11 battle stars during her time in the Pacific and off the Korean peninsula, and today she resides at the Pacific Battleship Center in the Port of Los Angeles and is a well-maintained museum ship open to the public. Iowa was ordered by Congress in July of 1939, and her keel was laid down at the Brooklyn Navy Yard on June 27, 1940. She was launched a little over 2 years later in August 1942. She had an overall length of 887 feet and a beam of 108 feet, which gave her just enough room to squeeze through the Panama Canal. Due to the refusal to sign the Second London Naval Treaty by the Japanese, and violations by them which were uncovered in 1937, the escalator clause was invoked and expanded, which pushed the standard displacement limitation of battleships to 45,000 tons. Fully loaded, she displaced over 57,500 tons when she entered service in 1943. Iowa carried 9 16-inch 50 caliber main battery guns, which were housed in 3 3-gun turrets, 2 forward of her superstructure and 1 aft. Her guns had to be specifically designed for her class after a mix-up between the Bureau of Ordnance and the Bureau of Construction and Repair during the design phase, which produced turrets that couldn't fit into the designed barbettes. The remedy was the Mark 7 gun, which was lighter and had a smaller outside diameter, thus allowing it to fit into a smaller turret, which in turn would fit into the designed barbettes. Each barrel could be elevated and fired independently and were capable of hurling the 2,700-pound Mark 8 super heavy shell almost 42,000 yards or about 24 miles. Iowa had a secondary battery of 5-inch 38 caliber dual-purpose guns, which were located amidships in 10 twin-barreled turrets, 5 on each broadside. These were highly effective and versatile weapons which were used in a variety of roles, including anti-aircraft, anti-surface, and shore bombardment. Her anti-aircraft battery was considerable and formidable as the role of the battleship in U.S. Navy doctrine had evolved by the time Iowa was completed. By 1943, a battleship's #1 job within a carrier task group was to provide protection from enemy air attack. To fulfill this job requirement, Iowa was equipped with 20 of the highly effective quadruple 40mm Bofors mounts and 49 single-mount 20mm Oerlikon autocannons. Iowa's armor scheme was modeled off the preceding South Dakota class. She was a well-protected ship. She had a main armor belt that was 12.1 inches thick, which was internal and inclined at 19 degrees, giving her the equivalent of 17.3 inches of vertical Class B armor at 19,000 yards. Iowa had immunity against fire from 16-inch 45 caliber guns at expected battle ranges, which were between 18,000 and 30,000 yards. She had 7.5 inches of deck armor between her main and second decks, and 19.5 inches of armor protecting her turret faces. Iowa was equipped with an SK air search radar and 2 SG surface search radars at the time of her commissioning. She had a pair of Mark 38 gun directors with Mark 8 fire control radars to direct her main battery and 4 Mark 37 directors with Mark 12 and Mark 22 radars, which combined directed her secondary battery. Iowa received upgrades to her radar and electronic warfare measures throughout her career, but especially during her reactivation in 1984. Iowa was powered by 4 steam turbines, each driving 1 shaft using steam provided by 8 oil-fired boilers. She was rated for 212,000 shaft horsepower, which gave her a top speed of 32.5 knots at normal displacement. She had a cruising range of 15,000 nautical miles at a speed of 15 knots. Iowa had a complement of 151 officers and 2,637 enlisted men during World War II. When she was reactivated in the 1980s, her complement fell to just under 1,800 officers and enlisted personnel. Iowa was commissioned with 2 aircraft catapults located on her fantail to launch float planes. Her float planes were employed to spot the fall of shot for the battleship's main batteries and perform search and rescue missions when called upon. Iowa commissioned into the fleet on February 22, 1943, and conducted her shakedown cruise in Chesapeake Bay and along the eastern seaboard. In late August, she was sent north and operated out of Newfoundland until late October to counter any forays into the North Atlantic by the German battleship Tirpitz. In early November, after returning from her assignment to Newfoundland, Iowa was assigned to carry President Franklin D. Roosevelt and his war cabinet across the Atlantic to meet with British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin at the Tehran Conference. Prior to Roosevelt coming aboard, Iowa was fitted with a bathtub for the president to use, as he was incapable of using the shower facilities on board due to his paralysis, making Iowa the only ship in the United States Navy to ever have a bathtub installed on board. On November 14th, as Iowa and her escorts made their way across the Atlantic, Roosevelt requested that Iowa conduct an anti-aircraft drill to demonstrate her defensive capabilities. Her escorts, including the Fletcher-class destroyer USS William D. Porter, performed routine torpedo drills as well. During a simulated torpedo run on Iowa, one of Porter's torpedoes accidentally discharged from its tube and headed directly towards Iowa. Numerous attempts were made to signal the Iowa via blinker light, until finally the crew of the Porter decided to break radio silence to inform the Iowa of the fish in the water, and Iowa turned hard right to avoid the torpedo, which exploded in her wake. When Roosevelt learned of the incoming torpedo, he asked his Secret Service men to roll his wheelchair closer to the side of the battleship so he could have a better view of the event. Iowa returned to the U.S. with Roosevelt and company on December 16th and got underway on January 2nd, 1944, for the Pacific Theater. Iowa made her combat debut from January 29th to February 3rd, as she supported carrier strikes against the Marshall Islands with Task Group 58.3 of the newly formed Fast Carrier Task Force. Next, she supported airstrikes against the Japanese naval base at Truk in the Caroline Islands from February 16th through the 17th during Operation Hailstorm. She was dispatched with her sister New Jersey to catch several Japanese warships attempting to flee the atoll through the North Pass. This was Iowa's first business opportunity of the war, and she got right to it. She fired 46 16-inch high-capacity rounds and 124 5-inch rounds. Iowa was reported to have hit Katori with her second salvo by a U.S. pilot, and just after Iowa's fourth salvo, Katori quickly listed to port, exposing 7 large shell holes on her starboard side. After being under attack by Iowa for about 5 minutes, Katori sank stern first. The destroyer Nowaki was the only Japanese ship from this group to escape, and suffered minor damage after being straddled by a salvo from Iowa and a salvo from her sister at a range of about 35,700 yards or 20.3 miles. Unfortunately, this was the only time in her career that Iowa performed her primary function of engaging enemy warships with her main battery. During the rest of February and into March, Iowa supported the Fast Carrier Task Force as it conducted raids in the Mariana, Marshall, and Caroline Islands. As part of this effort, she bombarded Mealy Atoll in the Marshall Islands on March 18th, during which she was struck twice by Japanese shore batteries, but only suffered minor damage. She then supported efforts in New Guinea in late April, before participating in Task Force 58's second strike on Truk and bombarding Ponape in the Carolines on May 1st. Iowa and the Fast Carrier Task Force then moved on to the conquest of the Mariana Islands in June. Iowa began the campaign by screening U.S. flat-tops as they conducted strikes throughout the island chain, before being detached on the 13th and 14th to bombard Saipan and Tinian. U.S. advances in the Marianas were considered a breach of Japan's inner defensive perimeter, and as such, prompted the Japanese fleet to sortie from their bases in the Philippines. During the ensuing Battle of the Philippine Sea from June 19th to the 20th, Iowa was detached along with the 6 other battleships of the Fast Carrier Task Force to form Task Group 58.7. This unit was ready for immediate action if Japanese surface units attempted to threaten the invasion beaches, and was deployed about 15 miles to the west of the carrier groups, where the enemy was expected to approach from. The battle line ended up being the first group sighted by the few Japanese pilots that managed to get through the U.S. fighter screen. Iowa's AA batteries helped repel 4 waves of attackers during the fight on the 19th, splashing one enemy plane and assisting with another. This, along with the one-sided results from the aerial battle, resulted in just about the complete destruction of Japanese carrier-based air power. Iowa roamed the waters off the Mariana Islands during July, with the Fast Carrier Task Force in support of the ongoing operations to seize the island chain. She then screened the carriers of her task group as they conducted strikes in the Philippines over the course of the next month to neutralize Japanese air power ahead of amphibious landings on October 20th at Leyte. Similar to the situation in the Marianas in June, the landing at Leyte drew the Japanese fleet into action. Iowa, now part of Task Group 38.2, screened her carriers as they conducted airstrikes against the Japanese center force in the Sibuyan Sea on October 24th. The Fast Carrier Task Force then raced north once enemy carriers were sighted that afternoon. Admiral William F. Halsey had made plans to leave a powerful surface force of 4 fast battleships, including Iowa, 5 cruisers, and 14 destroyers to guard the entrance to San Bernardino Strait, where the Japanese were expected to come through. This force, designated Task Force 34, was in fact not left to guard the entrance to the strait. Halsey had taken all of his forces north to attack the enemy carrier force, deciding instead to use his surface ships in what he believed would be the climatic engagement. However, as Iowa and the other Task Force 34 elements were almost within gun range of the Japanese carrier force, they were ordered to turn around and head south at flank speed to aid 7th Fleet because the Japanese had made it through the strait and threatened the beachhead at Leyte. As the 4 battle wagons raced south, they were delayed by the need to refuel their destroyers. This led to Iowa and New Jersey, both of whom were considerably faster than Washington or Alabama, to be dispatched in an attempt to catch the retreating Japanese as they headed back through the San Bernardino Strait. Unfortunately, the Iowas didn't get there in time, and the ships of the center force escaped destruction for the time being. With the last great sortie by the combined fleet over, Iowa got back to screening carriers as they conducted strikes throughout the Philippines and Formosa from late October to mid-December. On the 17th and 18th, Iowa rode out Typhoon Cobra along with the rest of Task Force 38, suffering damage to one of her shafts and losing one of her float planes in the process. She was dispatched to the West Coast and arrived in San Francisco on January 15, 1945, for repairs to her shaft and an overhaul. It was during this overhaul that she had her bridge area enclosed like her sisters and received new search radars and fire control systems. Iowa left the yard on March 19th, bound for the waters off Okinawa, and arrived there on April 15th. She supported carrier operations off Okinawa for the next month and supported airstrikes off southern Kyushu between late May and mid-June. Iowa then participated in strikes on the Japanese homeland in mid-July, where she bombarded targets in Muroran, Hokkaido. The city of Hitachi on Honshu was given the same treatment a few nights later. She then continued to support carrier strikes until the end of hostilities on August 15th. On the 27th, Iowa and Missouri entered Sagami Bay to support the occupation of the Yokosuka Naval Yard, before entering Tokyo Bay on the 29th to prepare for the formal surrender ceremony on September 2nd. After serving as Admiral William F. Halsey's flagship during the surrender ceremony, Iowa departed Tokyo Bay on the 20th bound for the west coast of the United States. Iowa arrived in Seattle in mid-October and returned to Japanese waters in early 1946, becoming the flagship of 5th Fleet before returning home to the United States in March. In October, she received an overhaul which saw a number of her 20 and 40 mm mounts removed. Iowa then conducted training and drills out of West Coast ports until being deactivated in March 1949. But her retirement was short-lived, as she was called back into service in July 1951 to help check communist aggression on the Korean peninsula with her 16-inch guns. Iowa was recommissioned on August 25th and departed for enemy waters in March 1952, arriving to become flagship of 7th Fleet April 1st. She received her first business opportunity on the 8th, when she shelled North Korean supply lines at Wonsan and Songjin, and continued in this role along the east coast of the Korean peninsula until mid-October, when she was sent stateside for an overhaul. Upon completion of her overhaul, Iowa operated in the Atlantic and Mediterranean until being deactivated for a second time in February 1958 and was assigned to the Atlantic Reserve Fleet at the Philadelphia Naval Yard. There she sat for the next 24 years until word came in 1982 that she would be reactivated as part of President Ronald Reagan's effort to build a 600-ship navy. Iowa was towed to Louisiana and completely overhauled and modernized. Some of the work that was performed included removing all of her remaining Oerlikon and Bofors mounts, as they were ineffective against modern jets and anti-ship missiles. 2 of her 5-inch turrets on each broadside were also removed during this overhaul. She then received new weapons systems, including launchers for Harpoon anti-ship missiles and Tomahawk cruise missiles, as well as 4 phalanx rotary cannons for defense against enemy missiles and aircraft. Iowa also had her radar, fire control systems, and electronic warfare capabilities modernized as well. In all, her complete modernization cost about $500 million, and she recommissioned into the fleet on April 28, 1984. Iowa spent the next year training in Central American waters before exercising with NATO in the North Atlantic during the later part of 1985. Iowa crossed the Arctic Circle while participating in this exercise and afterwards made port calls in France, Germany, Denmark, and Norway before returning to the U.S. On July 4, 1986, President Ronald Reagan came aboard Iowa during the International Naval Review, which was held in the Hudson River, and she spent the rest of the year operating in the North Atlantic. 1987 found Iowa once again off the shores of Central America until September, when she was dispatched to the Mediterranean. Between November and late February 1988, Iowa operated in the Persian Gulf as part of Operation Earnest Will. Here, along with other U.S. ships, she protected Kuwaiti tankers from Iranian forces as they transited through the Strait of Hormuz. She returned to Norfolk in March for an overhaul and spent the rest of 1988 training off the East Coast. On January 20, 1989, Iowa set the record for the longest 16-inch shell fired when she sent around 23.4 nautical miles while conducting a main battery exercise off Puerto Rico. Then, on April 19th, while conducting another gunnery drill off the coast of Puerto Rico, a violent explosion ripped through Iowa's No. 2 16-inch turret, killing 47 crewmen. A quick-thinking gunner's mate likely saved the ship from an even more catastrophic explosion by promptly flooding the magazine. After several investigations, the likely cause of this accident was an over-ramming of the powder bags into the breech of the gun. They were rammed farther into the gun breech and at a higher speed than designed, which caused the powder to ignite. This incident is still one of the Navy's worst losses of life during peacetime and forced a change in the powder handling procedures for U.S. battleships. Iowa was decommissioned for the last time on October 26, 1990, after a total of 19 years of commissioned service. She was the first of her class to be decommissioned for the final time, and this was done earlier than originally planned as a result of the damage to her No. 2 turret. She was originally assigned to the Atlantic Reserve Fleet, but was towed in 2001 to the West Coast and placed in the Pacific Reserve Fleet until she was stricken from the Naval Vessel Register in March 2006. In September 2011, Iowa was awarded to the Pacific Battleship Center for placement at berth 87 in the Port of Los Angeles. She was towed to her permanent berth in May 2012 and opened to the public that July. Thank you for watching, and as always, if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, comment, and subscribe so that we can bring you more content just like this.